Hey, it's Joe West from the West Barn with
Mike Shimshack.
Today we've got Mike Fraser on, producer, engineer, mixer. He's gone from janitor to award-winning producer and engineer. He's worked on, get a load of this, 7 AC/DC records, including The Razor's Edge, Ball Breaker, Stiff Upper Lip, Black Ice, Rock or Bust, Power Up. He recorded and mixed the legendary song Thunderstruck. He's also worked with bands like Aerosmith, Metallica, Chickenfoot, Elvis Costello, Bad Company, Motley Crue, The Cult, Guns N' Roses, Van Halen, Norah Jones, Rush, Bryan Adams, Led Zeppelin, and Joe Satriani. Welcome to the show, Mike Fraser. When you come to mix all these records, you know, what's your process? Are you always doing it on an SSL? I've seen pictures of you in front of a 9K, in front of a G plus. I've seen you in pictures in front of everything. When you're mixing a record, you probably have a place you want to do it. And where is that these days? During these records, where would that have been?
Yeah, mostly, well, pretty much all the AC/DC stuff has been mixed at the warehouse studio. And on various SSLs, because that's what they had, you know, I think, Razor's Edge was at Little Mountain on an E series. And then the ones after that, I think Stiff Upper Lip was a G. And then after that, the warehouse opened a new mix room and they put in a 9K. So that sort of became my room because nobody else wanted to use the 9K. And I loved the room. It was like the top of the building. All the windows looked out over the city. I had a big giant lounge. Nobody ever came upstairs. So it was almost like a private room. So I just kind of moved in there and just did everything there. I would say 9K isn't my favorite board to mix on sonically. There's a lot of things I like about how it integrates with the Pro Tools. So you don't have to use what's that thing called? 2 tools, you know, where you got to do that. Like it just was all natural. I just love the way that part of it worked. And I just got around the sonics of the board.
It was probably too big and too clean for you, right?
Yeah.
And
well, I know
that console, they kind of really stepped it up. It sounded great, but there was a grit that was in the E series that was like, it was making these rock records that we had become so familiar with. And I bet you if you put an oscilloscope on the 9K, it was much better. But people didn't seem to really want the headroom and that bigger, more open sound.
Yeah, the only issue I've ever had with the SSLs is the bottom ends. I wouldn't say funny on them, but you got to watch what you're doing on the bottom end because they don't help you out. You know, sometimes if you hear a rough mix, they rough mixed it on a knee, and so now you're mixing away. So I wonder what they did with the solo guitar, what effects. So you put on the rough mix and you go, whoa, where's all that bottom and that kick coming from? So you go back to your mix and you try and you just can't dial it in the same as. It's just this weird.
It doesn't exist there on that. Yeah, on that circuit.
You just gotta do what you gotta do with it, you know. Now I did do some mixing at Blackbird there in Nashville, and they had a 9000J. Is it, or is it the other way around?
Yeah, I thought all the J's were 9000s.
Okay, so then maybe it's the K because there's
J and K. Yeah,
a newer version of the 9000, and that one was better. They had sort of addressed some of that issue. So but I found that the 9K, I've tried tracking a record on a 9K. Forget about it.
What?
Mike Prees and those things are garbage.
Wow,
did not like them at all. Like.
So interesting that you say that.
Mixing, it's fine, but it's just something with the mic pre's that's just like, ugh.
All right, so give us a quick little, if you had to describe them as friends of the 4000, or let's say the E console, right? And all E's are E with G center sections, right? And they usually do some voodoo, but we're talking about the channel strips. The E, which would be the brown and black bass knob EQ ones, which are famous, much, you know, much of the modeling is done around that, or the G and G plus, which would be the Hugh Padgham, the more pastel-y version. So we're talking E, G, and we'll leave J and K out of it.
Sure.
Tell us, describe them as friends. Like how would you attribute personalities of those two consoles?
Well, I love the E EQ is what I love, and I think warehouse. That's all we've got is the EEQ, but with the big G plus center section and all that. Now the brown knob, the brown little knob on the EQ is
Early E.
Early E. It's okay. I don't prefer it. I like the Pultec one, which is the black knob. So that would be my best friend. I love that guy. Another good friend though is the G, the pastel. We always called it the Miami Vice board because it had that pastel. What I like about that is the multipliers. So if you go to your bottom end, it multiply. It doesn't change your curve. It just does a multiple thing. So I found, if I'm playing around with say 100 hertz on the sort of what would be the black knob, if you go the next knob up and multiply it, now that becomes, or divides it or whatever, now that becomes more bottom end. So I would do that super sub. So instead of adding your lower mid range of that one, I would multiply it down. So it's super sub because it had a different thing. So if I'm adding 100 and then go down to like 30 or 50 and add some of that in, it just created this cool curve.
So it was functionality more that you liked about that.
Yeah, and there's a different sound when he did that. Like, again, on the top end, you could crank, 10K, 15, 16K on the top end. But if you left the top one alone, went down to mid-range run, multiplied it, so it became your 10, 50, it had a different curve to it. It was just a different thing. So I like to be able to play around with that. Sometimes then, though, you lose your ability to zero in on your mid-range because you've already used those for something else. But, that was cool. I like
and
that.
would you would say the G was probably a cleaner EQ.
Yeah.
Right.
Which isn't, for rock, isn't always
Which
better.
is beautiful, too, because it's like Rupert Neve before he died, was always saying how I'm surprised how many people like those 80s series consoles. We're making so much better consoles now. And I was always kind of surprised that, that those guys don't realize that it's about, these are effect pedals. These consoles are just like, we love them for what they do wrong.
Right.
Yeah. You can manipulate them into doing these things that would turn out spectacular in works of music,
Yeah.
Okay, so when you're mixing on these desks, is it like, I get the drums up first with AC/DC, I start with a vocal? How do you approach it? And this has got to be the coolest day ever. It's like, okay, what are you doing? Hey, what's going on? You got a facility with a couple studios, and it's like, Mike's mixing the AC/DC record. It's like just seeing that on the schedule is got to be like a pretty cool move, right? The assistant's probably like, I got the AC/DC record coming up in June, so I'm not going to be able to go to the beach with you. It's like the prelude to it is almost better than doing the record. But so you're up in this top room mixing this record, let's say, and what is it? Day one, it's like, okay, day one, song one. How do you start your mix? What is that? What's the protocol?
Basically, generally, and especially when I've recorded it already, like I'll start with drums and just start from the bottom up, get the drums up, get them going where I think they need to be hammering, start adding the guitars and bass in, and then throw the vocal at the end. When I'm mixing stuff, and it's funny, I prefer mixing stuff I didn't record sometimes. I mean, a lot of the time, but sometimes you get something you're like, oh my God, and you're always trying to solve problems. But when I get something I've not recorded, I'll throw all the faders up, I'll get it spread on the board where I like to have things, drums at one end, and I like the vocal and all the stuff I'm going to be doing rides on kind of more in front of me in the middle of the speakers. But I'll throw everything up and just get a really quick rough mix go on, and sometimes I'll just throw that on loop and just have a listen and tell me where the song's going, because I don't want to start diving in. You can get the best drum tones ever, throw some samples on that, add some, oh man, those drums sound great. Okay, I'll get the bass in there. Okay, great. Now get the guitars. And then you're always chasing something, because just because each section sounds great doesn't mean it's going to mix together.
Great
so
point.
You got to mix for the song, and what does a song need?
Right.
Does a song need
rather than fighting it, right?
There in your face and very little cymbals, and like every song's different. So but it usually starts at drums at one point. Even when I find out where that song wants to go, I'll mute everything else, get going on the drums, check it. Oh no, a little more of that, and so it starts kind of for me from the drums up, and vocals and all that kind of stuff last.
I think it's brilliant. Like if you want to think of it selfishly, there's two ways to make a record. Solo things, get them sounding great. Working sections, get it sounding great. Drop in the vocal, and then you realize that all of your delays are landing on top of the vocal, that kind of stuff, right? And then the selfish way to mix it is to like, hey, how do I push this car downhill rather than push it uphill? What does it want to do? Because then everything is easy and unfolding in front of you. But it takes that little thing that's unnatural. It's like, I want to get in there and start working on the kick drum. It's like, it takes maybe 3 or 4, 5 listens, getting a coffee, sitting in a different part of the room to see like, oh, what does this song want to be? And once you figure out what it wants to be, it is literally as easy as pushing an apple cart off a hill, and then you just follow it down the hill and make great decisions. Like when you're moving those microphones on the speaker and you're like, that's it right there. You're letting it do the work. And then you're just making decisions, which is rather than manhandling a record. And I always appreciate when someone manhandles a record because it's like, wow, that guy's got dominion over that record. But not always in the best interest of the record, ironically.
Are you doing any parallel compression, Mike, on this stuff? The drums always sound incredible on those records.
Yeah, I've maybe about halfway or later on in my career, I discovered that. And I'm like, oh, this is great because you get a great drum sound going, and then you do a parallel of all. Sometimes not all the drum tracks, but I'll bust all the drum tracks out into a parallel compression, and sometimes I'll have to take the cymbals out because it's just pumping too much. But yeah, and sometimes I'll do that on guitars too.
Oh, okay.
Because then it controls your mix a little bit better before it hits the SSL compressor, which I always have on the output buses. And sometimes you just get slamming that too much and you just hear everything sucking and all that. And I say, okay, I got to control a little bit more before it gets there. And so, yeah.
That's an interesting way to know what you just said there. It's like, oh, I got to go back and fix this because of what it's doing over here. Because you're always wondering like, oh, how do I set this 2-bus compressor? It's like, well, you know what? That's a good way to know. Like, oh, I got to go back and work on this because what I see it doing here. So do your drums, they go out to a drum bus and then get some processing, or do they just live and go right to the 2 mix?
They go to the 2 mix, and then I add in the parallel compression to that.
Parallel compression just has like maybe a limiter on it or something. And is it?
Yeah.
What kind of? Are we talking about like something on the console or outboard?
No, it's outboard one. Yeah, I'll use.
Care to share?
On this one, I was in Poland doing a record, and this company had this thing called the Monster or something. It's this big yellow thing, and they said, "Oh, hey, can we get a picture of you, for our company, with this thing?" And I said, "Well," I said, "Sure." They said, "Well, we'll give you one or whatever." I'm like, "Yeah, sure." So I'm like, "Hey," they used it, whatever. Well, 2 weeks later, this thing showed up in Vancouver. I'm like, "Oh, cool! They did send me one. Awesome!" And it just sat there forever. But it's a cool compressor limiter box, and it's got tubes in it, so you can pot the tubes in so you can get some tube compression. It's got some cool stuff. So I played around with it on different things, room tracks, try it on the vocal, try guitars, and okay, well, that's kind of cool. It's not really a cool thing. And then I had it set up for something else, and I was just doing my drums and pushed something up, and I'm like, oh, what the fuck's that? I'm like, oh yeah, the drums are going there. So now that's my drum compressor. It's awesome.
That's awesome.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
Okay. Bass is on 2 channels at this point, or 1? 2. It would be DI and Mike. You get your blend on that. Does that bust out just to the 2 mix, or is there any voodoo going on?
Everything goes to the 2 mix always with me. I don't bust anything out.
So on your drum kit, real quick, it's like kick, snare, center, right? Toms, pan, one perspective or another. Overheads, are they wide left, right, or do you pan them in?
Wide left to right, because when I'm recording them, if I've got like say four mics on it, they're not like left, right.
I understand. Gotcha.
I want those hit in the spectrum that you're looking. I always do it drum perspective, audience perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I know some guys like a drum perspective, but I think a larger percent of the listeners are audience perspective. So I always do it that way. But I want to see that when he's hitting the cymbals, I want to see them. And I know in the noise of all the rock and all that subtlety is pretty much gone. In your ears, it's left or right, but I put them where they should be.
Yeah. I just recently did a thing on video where I had to do drummer's perspective, and it just freaked me out so much that I just patched it, reversed the patch, and had it my normal way. And And everyone's like, "Oh, you screwed up." You know, the guy came in, the drummer came in to listen to it. And he's like, "Oh, you messed it." And I'm like, "Oh no, I'm just patched backwards." So I pulled out the patch. He's like, "Oh, okay." So guitars on an AC/DC record, it's Malcolm on one side and Angus on the other, and it's
always
wide left, wide right.
Now left and right. It's always wide when I've done it. Yeah.
And is there? Do you have any other guitar processing that would make them live anywhere than far left and right? You don't have like a room mic or anything panned any other?
Far left and right. It's usually one Malcolm and one Angus track. They don't double them at all. On some songs, sometimes Angus will go through and put power chords in, like on choruses or something. But that's always tucked way back and kind of mono. So it's just almost to have a little more of that in the chorus. But especially the way Mal played was he would play with heavy dynamics because his sound's quite clean, actually. He's got a little bit of grit on there, but it's not that long, buzzy guitar. And, you know, when I see guys trying to emulate AC/DC, they always got that wrong. They've got a, you know, big amp fully cranked out. And it's like, no. So when he played soft, it got quite, not tinkly, but, you know, soft, like verse, and then, but he could, the harder he hit, the louder and bigger his guitar got. So when the choruses come, that's him just hammering it, and it's almost like another guitar was there, you know?
Yeah.
The combination of their two guitars, because Angus is more overdriven and pretty sort of buzzy all the time. You know, there's not a lot of dynamic to Angus. All the dynamic was with Mal.
Wow.
And so at this point, it's just like, okay, lead vocal. Well, the beauty of a true rock band.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not like these Aerosmith records that you did where it was like, here comes the symphony. You know, it was like, those are big. I listened to some of those Aerosmith records and I'm like, I don't know how they created that space to have all that stuff. And it's also beautifully, you know, audible. But the beauty of a rock record, especially with a band like AC/DC, is that it's just open. It is what it is. It's simplistic. And it was like, okay, that vocals and maybe some, you know, some cool little chant vocal, and you're done. You got a rock record.
Yeah.
So how long does it take you to mix these songs? A day, a song?
Well, traditionally, in most rock records, 6 weeks to record and 2 weeks to mix. So a song a day, basically, to mix.
Song a day. Okay, so you vocals, everybody's going. What else? You said the guitars maybe get some parallel compression.
Yeah.
Bass is straight up the center, of course.
Yeah.
Vocal straight up the center, lead vocal.
Yeah.
I did notice though on Thunderstruck that those beginning thunder, that part, man, the imaging on that was pretty incredible. And I was like, I don't know what you did to get that, but it was like, you could tell it was part reverb, but it was just like this incredibly organic spread in that didn't feel panned or placed. Do you remember that?
You know, I don't know that we did anything special. I mean, with them, you know, we'd get Mal and Cliff out there to do background, never Bryan, because Bryan's got such a distinctive voice. It would just be like him doubling up on himself. So it's mostly Malcolm and Cliff singing, and then we'd
what you did in the mix in that was what struck me.
Well, maybe there was a verb that I put on there. I don't exactly.
Just a really it was like you had gone through like a spatializer. It wasn't like phasey, but it had this image to it that was so like organic. Like you usually when I do stuff like that, I'll be like, oh, I can tell I placed that vocal there and that there. But you had this beautiful thing. And then there's, of course, when the drums came in on that, it's probably an AMS or some inverse room on the drums. It was just like totally cool. It's like you're right there. You're back driving your 78 Firebird. You know, it's like 8-track in. Okay, so parallel compression or parallel processing maybe on the guitars, and then you're on your 2 mix. What are you doing on your 2 mix? Or am I missing anything? Tell me if I am.
Just a little bit of SSL bus compression. You know,
okay.
Try not to slam it too hard. I like it fairly light because if you need to do it more later, you can, but you can't undo it. So
you're talking 3 dB of pump on the SSL.
Yeah.
Okay. In your settings on that, because this is like I never change my SSL compressor. Tell me what yours are.
I never. Well,
you probably have it so long you don't remember
between two to one, and then once the next notch up, sometimes I'll go a little harder depending on the song, but it's mostly 2-1.
2-1. Do you remember
Fast.
what your release is? Fast attack.
Yeah, fast release.
Okay.
It's like that, whatever that is.
Yeah, right. And that's the
Hard, right, left, it's done.
All my friends who have these, Alan Smarts or the SSL, it's like when you ask them, it's like, if you ask me, I couldn't tell you either, but I never change it is the point. It's like you kind of find what you like about that SSL bus compressor, and then it's like you just run level through it and get the amount of gain reduction, and it's like, okay, I've put it through that part of the sausage factory. Are you following that with an EQ or a limiter or anything?
Sometimes I'll throw. I've got my Sontec EQ, so sometimes I'll throw that across the 2 bus as well, and that you can just add. If you need a little sparkle one song, or the bottom end isn't quite there, you can add that in, and they're sort of those mastering EQs, right?
Yeah, they're the stepped ones, right?
Yeah. And mine are I got them half dB steps.
Mm-hmm. And that's it, huh?
That's it. Yeah.
You're printing to half inch. You're printing to.
Yeah. And with these guys, we try and do analog as long as we can. Like all the tracking is done analog. Then we'll transfer that into Pro Tools. And then when I'm doing guitar overdubs, it's a bit of a pain, but for me, for those guys, it's well worth it. I'll have because I've got 2 mics on each cab, right? So we use a half-inch analog, and as we're tracking it, we're listening to the Pro Tools digital, but we're tracking analog as well. And once we've got our track, I have my guys go back in,
line it up,
and then we've got analog guitars too.
Oh, that's pretty brilliant.
And it's different. Some guys do it all in the Pro Tools and then bounce it through half-inch, and then here's our thing. Now it's different because it's already hit the digital world, and whatever you like in analog is now you've got an analog version of a digital track. I like the analog, and you can have a digital version of an analog track. If you follow me.
Right. Yeah, I got you. And I love that. What, you just run tape at 15 IPS or 30 IPS? And when it runs out, you put a new reel on a rewind and use the certain reel for so many passes.
Yeah.
And it's
kind of like that. What's that?
Clasp.
Clasp. Yeah.
Clasp.
Now I've tried that at what was Zach Brown's place in Nashville there?
Yeah, Southern Ground.
Southern Ground. Yeah. So they had a clasp there. I tried that. Different thing. Like I didn't like it. I don't know what it was, but maybe the machine was running at a slower rate, like 15 or 7.5 or so. I don't know. But there's just something about it that wasn't the same as doing the real thing.
This is a good question for you. Well, I think they also put it on an insert, so it's hitting 80 Ds first, and then it's going out. But I don't know much about Clasp. I just knew of it. So were you running 30 IPS on the analog machines when you were recording? Or 15?
No. On the 24 tracks, yes, 30 IPS. On the half-inch, when we're just doing stuff, 15, because 30, one pass, you rewind. Oh, hang on a second, So,
right.
15 on the other.
Because obviously you run the same amount of tape. You get a spool tape. You're either going by 30 inches a second or 15. So it's either a 31-minute reel or a 16-minute reel. So you just have a guy manning tape. Or how often will you use the same piece of tape before you put on virgin tape?
Days.
Oh, there you go. Wow, I'm surprised.
Yeah. Interesting story. When I was an assistant, there was a band here in Camp, actually Bob Rock. It was his band called the Paolas. And one night after a jingle session, Bob came, he was there, and he says, I got this, just wrote the song last night. Hey, can we throw it down on tape? So got his band in there. Well, they didn't have any tape. He said, let's just use one of these old jingle reels. We didn't even bulk erase it or whatever. We just went over whatever was on there. And they used to reuse all their jingle reel. Once the song was done mixed, they'd reuse it again, right? So they kept the cost down. So we used this old piece of tape, did this song. Well, if it didn't win a Juno for best engineered record. And we did, everything wrong. Old tape, that, whatever, just bang, 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 fast. And
I'm slowly realizing that nothing matters until it matters.
I know guys that will only go on the tape twice. Like once they had 2 passes. Oh no, you can't use that tape again. It's got to be fresh tape.
Right.
Ah.
All right. So So you're in when you're laying down to is it half inch your mixes you're laying down to?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What machines are these Studer machines, MCIs, Stevens?
MCIs. Yeah, they got MCIs.
MCIs.
Yeah.
Great machine, underrated machine. I just think there was so many of those that people, kind of discounted them because they weren't that expensive, but they're great sounding machines. So as half inch is what you're mixing to, you said?
Half inch at 30.
At 30 IPS.
Yeah.
And then it's like at this point, you're then printing up references. People are listening. You're going back and revising.
Yeah.
So you've got this whole thing documented. You can do a recall and get back to some semblance of order.
Yeah, my guys are pretty good. And because I hardly use any outboard gear, they come back almost exact every time, As you know, sometimes the SSL has partial recall. It's not sometimes totally like, no, I know I didn't, have the top end cranked on that one. Like that's wrong.
Yeah. And who usually, do you get to choose a mastering engineer, or are you just like whoever gets it gets it?
Pretty much. For many, many years it was George Marino at Sterling. And then when he passed away, his sort of understudy, Ryan Smith. We used Ryan Smith a lot on that stuff at Sterling. I'll use a guy named Adam Ian. Bob Ludwig was another big guy. I've used him a few times at Gateway. So Adam, it was Bob's understudy. So sometimes they'll use Adam, sometimes Ryan. I'll bounce around to a few guys. I have a very specific kind of thing in mind, what I want to hear. And what I've found, especially the last 10 years, is, you send it off to some guy and they just squash it and add top end. It's like, no. I like my dynamics, I like the verse to go like this. And when the chorus comes in, I want it to do that. I don't want the verse to sound, oh, that sounds awesome. And then, oh, I guess we're in the chorus now. Like, don't squash it. And they go, oh, but we got to get the levels up. I said, I don't care about levels. I want it to sound how I sent it to you. Now, if you can, add a little sparkle to it or some more bottom, match the songs. To me, the biggest part of mastering, putting on a record is just match them so that they all flow nicely together. One's not louder or duller. And that, to me, should be mastering. I don't want you to fix my mixes. I've got them the way I want them to sound, So
yeah. How does the approval process happen? Like when let's say before you go to mastering, is it just like everyone gets a vote, or is it mostly one dude in the band saying, hey, this, that, and the other thing?
Well, it depends on the band, like with the
producer, I'm sure.
Obviously it's, producer and, now it's Angus, but it used to be Angus and Malcolm. And that's the only two opinions that matter is the producer and Angus,
Yeah.
Fairly
simple process.
What do you think, Mike? But, really it's already kind of decided.
Is it a fairly simple process? Like it's usually like put up the guitars in this, put the snare drum up. It's those kinds of little punch lists, or is it like you've got it worked out at this point? It's a pretty known quantity.
It's pretty worked out. I think, maybe the only decision putting the record together is, like we'll do vocal up mixes, because that's usually the biggest reason for a recall is we need a little bit more vocals or whatever. So sometimes you'll send the vocal up version of the mix to the mastering or whatever, but it's all decided before it goes to mastering. Mm-hmm. So, we've got it. And then it's more about just balancing the songs. Like that one, for whatever reason, got mixed a little duller than the other one, And as a mix engineer, sometimes you've got to mix it duller because it's not gelling. And then I'll add the overall top later, or you got to mix it super bright so that things pop out, and then later on you could add the warmth around it. It's sometimes a song wants to be mixed in a certain frequency, and
you never know you never know what's coming before it or after it. So like the relative level frequency wise from the song that they just heard, you don't know that sequence most of the times when you're making a record, or even if the song's going to make the record.
And as you know, like you could have this exact same guitar amp, guitar thing, guitar EQ, and it's a different key, but it's the same. That's going to react differently to the EQ. You get it, So yeah, mastering smooths that stuff kind of out.
And what's your level of anxiety? You finished a record, you sent it off to mastering. Do you have a high degree of anxiety, or do you just forget about it? That's in the past, I'm moving forward. Or are you like, what's this record? Mm-hmm. Is this going to be the greatest thing I ever did or the worst thing I ever did? Or do you have any level of like fear?
Nah, when I'm done a record, it takes me probably a good year or more to even listen to it again because I've heard it so many times. It just sounds like work. Now it's definitely a rush to hear it on the radio, like, oh yeah, but that's usually a year later anyways. But I'll get my copy of it once it's done, and you get all the art. Oh, that looks cool, and oh yeah, my name's on there and spelt right. But I never play it again. Like,
yeah,
I've usually been kept pretty busy, so I'm on to the next thing anyways. And then when we do stuff like this, I've got to really rattle the brain to even remember what we did on that, because as you move on,
right,
you got to empty out the space for the new stuff to go in the brain.
Right. Well, it's been amazing talking to you. It's been I feel like I got a little slice, like I was your assistant for a summer.
Yeah.
And it's like pretty cool, man. It sounds like you're a pretty stellar dude in regards to just being in the room with and creating with, which is like, maybe the most valuable thing our audience can take away from this is like learning why people are successful. It's like, no doubt you've got the talent. No doubt you have the philosophy, and you're an artist. Don't get called an artist as an engineer very often, but you're an artist. But I think what you've been stressing through the whole thing, and what the takeaway might be, is that it's a lot about how you treat people, the space you create, and then how you sort of fit into a room and scale to a room, whatever it needs. You're confident enough that you can sort of become that shapeshift. Yeah. So congratulations.
Like you're a similar guy too. Again, it's about getting the art, because most artists are neurotic and, very like, oh, was that good? And then maybe not on the outside, but on the inside,
Oh, yeah.
So us that are there helping them need to be their nurturers, and always positive feedback is the biggest thing you could give an artist. And
yeah.
Like you say, oh, that was great. Hey, another idea would be to, instead of going, yeah, I don't know, dude, that sucked. You got a better one. Or sometimes it needs that too. Like, but once you get to know your artist, sometimes you could be brutally honest with them without hurting their ego, so.
Mike Shimshack's a king of that. If you're in a room with Mike, he's a hit songwriter and record producer. But it's like every time I'm in the room with Mike, he's making everyone feel like a rock star, and we always get something I'm proud of at the end of the day.
Yeah.
That wouldn't have been there without him being in the room. So make sure sometimes leaving your mark in the room is being quiet. Sometimes it's not being, the ball hog. Yeah. And
I always tell my assistants and any runners and all that, in the room is, if you're talking, you're not listening. And to be a great engineer, you have to learn how to listen. So
yeah,
you decide where you want to be.
I love that you're using the assistance of some of the mastering guys that you said multiple guys. Oh, then we shifted to his up and comer, that's pretty cool. It shows that you know the difference. The fact that you want to use a 57 on a vocal when you could use anything you want. It shows vision, shows that you got confidence. So we're all searching for that. Thanks for helping us find a little bit of it. Anywhere, are you got any social places, destinations people can find you at? I know you have a website.
Yeah, just www.mikefrasermix.com.
Okay. And you are attainable. People could reach out to you with a project, and if you're the right fit, you would maybe find a way to be on that record.
Yeah, my email's on my website, and I think there might even be a little form you can fill out, whichever. Yeah, it's all there.
Awesome, dude.
I answer everything. I read and answer everything. So
that's awesome.
Be kind. Be kind.
You're such a good dude. I could just sense it from day one with you.
Well, let's hang. Once this pandemic is over, let's
come to Nashville. We always invite people down to hang out.
I love it down there. I've been down there a few times. I love it down there. Like, it's a little bit too hot and sweaty for this Canadian kid in the summer, but
yeah.
Well, we would be personally offended if you come to Nashville and don't grab a beer with us.
Hey, got it.
And we're artists, so you can't hurt our feelings. You've already said that you've committed to not doing that. All right, pal. Thank you so much. That's it. This is going to be a two-parter, because we're going to divide it into the sort of the recording information and then the mix stuff. So if you've made it this far, you already know that, so it doesn't matter.
Well, that's what I loved about this one. Usually you get all the, the stories of the band and this and that. And how did you do this? And what did you do before that? This was more of a technical one, which is a little different for me. So
we've
awesome.
ironically, thank
Yeah.
you. We've ironically found that our people are as interested in the things that the nerd aspect of it,
That we
not
are.
even nerd. We found ironically that people actually want to know what we want to know. Because I secretly want to know, like, all right, how does a guy do 7 records with AC/DC?
Yeah.
How do you put in that machine and not get chewed and spit out? How do you do that? Like, that is almost more cool than the biggest records you've ever done to me. It's like, how did that guy do that? Because if I could get that out of that dude and learn that skill, that's superhuman. It's a superhuman trait.
It just reminded me of another story. We got another 5 minutes here.
We do. Well, let me put in another real half-inch. Hold on.
Yeah. Rewind the tape. So the bass sound on the Aerosmith Pump record was a total accident. So Tom's out, had him in his little bass booth. We got a SVT and DI and all that. So he's playing around and we're tweaking away. And hey, Tom, can you put a little bit more bottom end on your amp there instead of running back and forth? Yep. So this and that. Okay, a little more mid range. We had him sort of adjusting things and all that. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there it is. Whatever you did, Tom, don't touch a thing. That's awesome. He says, I haven't touched it. Well, what happened? He said, I don't know. He says, oh, it's night and day. It's awesome. So we go out there. Well, one of the speakers had ripped and had a rip in it. And it was just flat playing. It just created, because the other speakers were still working, just put this overlay of sort of distortion thing on it. And I was like, wow. So that's the bass sound on Pump.
That's amazing.
Later on, we've tried, doing a little cut in a speaker.
That's what I'm asking.
Could never emulate that thing again.
Well, how were you able to? Did it keep growing during the record? I wonder, or like,
not to my memory. It was just ripped, and maybe it was a little ripped by one of the. I don't know why it ripped and why it didn't continue ripping, but yeah,
dumb luck. It's like how much of that is in every record we do.
Well, isn't that one of the things that Dave Davies from the Kinks, I Think You Really Got Me, he had sliced the speaker, and it was one of the first distorted guitar tones ever recorded.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
You know who else? Todd Rundgren was always experimenting with that. I don't know if he did it successfully, but I heard stories about him just destroy screwdrivers of speakers trying to get to a sound,
Yeah.
Well, man, we'd love to.
Paige told me once when they were doing the Yardbird stuff, and it was back in the days where the engineers had lab coats on and all that. And so they're doing this stuff, and he was doing this guitar tone, and he said, okay, let's do this. And the guy was all up. He said, well, we can't. He says, the guitars are all distorted. He says, I can't work like this, and walked out of the room, pushed all the faders up, because in that day that was off, and stormed out of the room, and Jimmy and everybody sitting there, and they put the faders back on and say, okay, let's go.
Amazing.
Great stories. We would love to have you back on and maybe delve into just another, specific thing. You're such a great guest. Thank you for coming on. That's it, folks. Thank you if you hung on this long. Thank you. You're a true nerd. We should have a nerd gift for them if they've made it this far, like some sort of like little code where they could cash it in and get something. But we appreciate you. That's it this week from the West Barn. We'll see you next time. Signing off.